MonsterLabo introduced the first during 2019. It is a fanless mini ITX case that was built around a large heatsink that they call the heart. The heart is able to cool, based on my testing, about 95 watts from the CPU and about 160 watts from the GPU, completely passively. 2 years later, we have the Beast. The Beast is basically two first cases fixed into one chassis. It has two hearts, one for the CPU and one for the GPU. MonsterLabo claims that it can cool up to about 150 watts from the CPU and 250 watts from the GPU. The Beast is compatible with full-sized ATX motherboards and a large variety of graphics cards with PCBs up to 290mm. It is about 18 inches tall, 15 inches long, and 9 inches wide, and weighs about 50 pounds fully assembled. The side panels are available in either solid black painted aluminum or tempered glass. The first is one of the more difficult fanless cases to assemble. The motherboard and graphics cards are mounted to the heatsink rather than the heatsink being mounted to them, and the mounting mechanism is very unconventional. It can be difficult to align everything properly, and the cables have to be routed properly before mounting the motherboard. The Beast is no different. It might be a bit easier to assemble simply because there is more space available, but I wouldn't recommend this case for first-time PC builders. The motherboard and graphics card are mounted to opposite sides of the case, and they are joined by a PCIe riser cable. Since the I/O ports are all inside the case, just like with the first, MonsterLabo provides expansion cables that connect the I/O ports on the motherboard and graphics card to the back panel of the case. It's not ideal, but it works out fine. The PC I will build here includes the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X CPU, an MSI MPG B550 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi motherboard, 32GB of Mushkin Redline 3200MHz CL16 memory, a 1TB Mushkin Gamma NVMe drive, an EVGA GeForce RTX 3070 XC3 Ultra OC graphics card, and a 600-watt SeaSonic Prime titanium fanless power supply. After a 22-minute build montage, I will come back and discuss test results. Once the build was complete, I installed Windows 10 and tested the CPU and GPU thermals using Prime 95 and FurMark. I used Hardware Info 64 to monitor core temperatures. Each test was run for half an hour to get to heat saturation. Running Prime 95's torture test, the 5600X used about 80 watts, and the average maximum core temperature after half an hour was 76 degrees C, with a 25-degree ambient temperature. The 5600X is a relatively difficult CPU to cool though due to its single-core chiplet design. Remember that MonsterLabo claims that the beast can cool CPUs with up to 150 watts? In another system, I tested the Ryzen 9 5900X. Using about 120 watts, the Ryzen 9's average maximum core temperature was in the low 80s. Moving on to the GPU and FurMark, the RTX 3070 used 234 watts and the average maximum core temperature after half an hour was 89 degrees C, with an 18-degree ambient temperature. The GPU began modulating its power down from 240 watts to prevent it from getting above 90 degrees. But at 234 watts in the end, it was still above the base power level of 220 watts. In the other system with the Ryzen 9 CPU, I tested the NVIDIA Quadro P2200. The P2200 used 62 watts, and with a 23-degree ambient temperature, the maximum core temperature was just 50 degrees. So I think MonsterLabo's recommendation of no more than 150 watts for the CPU and 250 watts for the GPU is reasonable. As mentioned before the build, this case is one of the more difficult fanless cases to build with. It is not very easy to get all of the cables installed properly, and then get them all out of the way of the heatsink and CPU block before mounting the motherboard. The mounting nuts on both the motherboard and graphics card side require quite a bit of downward force and patience to get them threaded onto the bolts properly. Next, I tested the performance of the system using Passmark's performance test. The Ryzen 5 CPU received a score of 4.5 out of 5 stars, and the NVIDIA RTX 3070 received 4.5 for both 2D graphics and 3D graphics. The 3200 MHz memory received 4 stars, and the Mushkin Gamma SSD received 5 stars. The system received 4.5 stars overall. The MonsterLabo Beast really is a beast of a case. The only case that comes close to it is the Tormetal UP10, which can cool about 120 watts CPU and 200 watts GPU. That's 400 combined watts with the Beast, and 320 watts with the UP10. Both of these cases will cost close to $1,000 though with shipping, so they are obviously not for everyone. But if you need a machine with really power-hungry chips that makes zero noise and has no moving parts, the Beast is helping to make that a possibility. Now, a lot of GPUs and even some CPUs will produce coil whine, and it can be even more noticeable in a fanless case than it is in a standard case. Luckily, the components in the build shown here did not have any noticeable amounts of coil whine, and the system was silent even at full load. To get photos and test results of every one of my PC builds, check out my Patreon page. Like the video and subscribe for more fanless PC content. And visit fullysilentpcs.com if you are interested in purchasing your own custom-built fanless PC.